I would say that in Greek tragic terms, I live the opposite of the Oedipal life, which is where destiny is written out for you. I live more like a game where chance, the ball bounces this way instead of that way, makes all the difference.
Hello and welcome to Artifacts, a living archive dedicated to preserving the first-person stories of queer, avant-garde, and underground culture, told by those who lived it. Today's episode is part of our series Downtown Performance, produced in collaboration with NYU Skirball, spotlighting the radical artists who reshaped New York's theatrical underground. This episode features Richard Schechner, director, theorist, and pioneer of environmental theater. Born in Newark, New Jersey, Schechner's career has bridged practice and theory, from founding the Performance Group in 1967 to developing new approaches to ritual and performance around the world. He was instrumental in bringing Jerzy Grotowski's teaching to the United States, and as longtime editor of the Drama Review, he expanded the very definition of what theater could be. At NYU, Schechner founded the Department of Performance Studies, cementing his legacy as one of the great architects of contemporary performance.
We lived in my grandfather's house, 18 Renner Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. So my grandfather, Samuel, at around age 65 or so, decided to retire from the pharmaceutical business, stop being a druggist, and pick up his father's work. He never became a rabbi, but became a scholar of Talmud and of Hebrew. He wanted to teach his grandchildren, and I was the right age, so I was like 9, 10, 11 years old. It was basically the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. He had different teaching aids, cards in which on one side was the Hebrew and the other side was the English, and he would play flashcards. He would read the Hebrew and then say what the English was, or see the English and say what the Hebrew was. But what he really taught me was a methodology. And he also taught me that there's no such thing as too much skepticism. There's no such thing as, I would say to him very early on, I don't know exactly when I became an atheist, but I'm a very, very devoted atheist. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, you be whatever you want. You're Jewish, you'll always be Jewish. B, God could care less whether you're an atheist or not. It doesn't matter. So I've always been comfortable being Jewish and being an atheist. I think the prayers are silly, but I love them. In high school, I was a very bad boy. I had disciplinary problems all the way through grammar school. I had a fight with another boy, and it started a food riot in the lunchroom, and I was suspended from school. I was made to sit in the academic disciplinary vice principal's office and do all my classes there. And he got to like me, and he said, you're very smart, but you'll never get into any college. You have no recommendations from the school. If you promise me that you will behave, and you have to promise me, I'll call the head of admissions at Cornell University who I know, and I'll do my best to get you in. I had no idea what Provincetown was when I arrived. I mean, I knew it was at the end, I knew it was supposed to be a nice town, but I was just struck. I auditioned for a production of Blood Wedding by Garcia Lorca, and I was cast as Leonardo, which is the male lead. We had all each put in a little money, and we had rented the Provincetown Yacht and Tennis Club for a long weekend to show this play. The director went off with our money. So we had already paid for the Yacht and Tennis Club. We weren't finished with the production. We didn't think we could mount it without a director. And we were saying, what could we do? And then I said, my God, I want to run a summer theater. But we did a summer season like nobody else ever did. Miss Julie, Strindberg, 3 Sean O'Casey plays, a short Beckett, The Chairs and the Lesson of Ionesco, When We Dead Awaken of Ibsen, the first environmental theater, Philoctetes on the beach, so that the audience had to come across the dunes. Neoptolemus and Odysseus arrived by boat. That was really the first really environmental theater production. Environmental theater comes through happenings, and my friendship with John Cage and Alan Caprow. I took the word environment from Caprow, and he decided you had a painting on the wall Then the painting became an assemblage, and then it became an environment when you did the whole gallery. Then you did events inside the environment, which was a happening. That's the source of environmental theater. That in the writings of Antonin Artaud. I met Mary Heaton Vorst. I was coming to find a place to live, and I came upon 466 Commercial Street, and it just said room for rent. I went in, there was an old lady there, and she said, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, running a theater in the Yacht and Tennis Club. She said, well, you've come to the right place. And she said, you know who Eugene O'Neill is? I said, of course I know Eugene O'Neill is. I said, well, I worked with him. I was on the wharf, Lewis Wharf, on the, and she started to tell me stories. So they were doing black theater, and they wanted to do something for Freedom Summer, which was '64, which was coming up. And they heard that Schechner was at Tulane. So they came down, and we met in my office at Tulane, and they asked me to join them, and I joined them. So we became the three producing directors of the Free Southern Theater. They moved the headquarters of FST to New Orleans, and we had a summer season that was going to be 3 plays. In White America, which was a documentary by Martin Duberman from Princeton University about the black experience in America up to that point. Waiting for Godot, which is a kind of surprising selection to take to rural Mississippi, because we performed in churches, farmyards, in barns. You know, there was no formal theater that we could perform in. And then we did Ossie Davis's Pearly Victorious, which I directed. In '65, they decided they wanted an all-black theater. So I got kicked upstairs. I became chairman of the board for a while. Then after a couple of years, I quit. I was not really interested in being white window dressing. I think the core is to think of the world of performance, not the world of theater. In other words, Shakespeare wrote all the world as a stage. That's not quite true. The stage is a species, a kind of performance. So I think what happened with me was that I saw that the theatrical metaphor, all the world's a stage, was true, but it was so limited. And after demolishing the idea that the Greek tragedies came from, quote, ritual, the theory of the so-called Cambridge anthropologists, and then setting up a model for what is performance, and I say that it's play, game, sports, theater, and ritual. By then, I was getting more and more familiar with happenings and Cage and Caprow and these expanded view of what constitutes performance. And by then, importantly, I had read Irving Goffman, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. So I read it, in the early '60s. The notion of performance I take directly from Goffman. He uses the word performance, and that's where I got it. Now, I don't know how performance became performance art. Am I part of the reason for that? Probably somewhere back then. Or Caprow. I don't know who is starting to use the word performance instead of theater, or performance as the overall thing, and also performance as both a noun and a verb, to perform, and performance is both truth and false at the same time. You're just performing, it's just an act. All of that multiple stuff, and then the notion of the performative, all that feeds in. I think I had a kind of insight into what that was before I had the scholarly knowledge of it. So I was interested in experimental theater. I was interested in, Jarry to Duchamp to, Artaud to Caprow to Cage, that strain of performance. But that wasn't theater. So the word performance, when I saw Goffman, that was a good thing to call that stuff, because it wasn't theater. And I saw in both the vitality of the black church and the theater I saw there, my own acting out in the Army, the fun it could be to do what would now be called LARP, live action role play, but mine was kind of risky. Jim Hatch was in Egypt for some reason in '62 or '63. He sends me an article in French about a production of Faustus in Poland, an article written by a man named Eugenio Barba. I'd never heard of Eugenio Barba. I had never heard of Jerzy Grotowski, but I read this article. It was brilliant. It was about a very unusual environmental theater, if you will. Didn't have the term yet, production of Marlowe's Faustus. So I decided to translate it. And I wrote to Grotowski and I wrote to Barba. And so I started to know them. And I found out that Grotowski, was interested in contact with the West. This is in 1963, 64. And Barba was the hinge, really, the connector. And I began the correspondence that finally led to Grotowski coming to New York in 1967. So where he did his workshop, I was in, which was the beginning of both my performance group and Andre Gregory's The Manhattan Project. Both came out of the Grotowski workshop. He was supposed to come to the United States in 1966, but then I think it was the invasion of Hungary. Something happened and his visa was revoked, or it never came through. He couldn't come to the United States because he was from Poland, an Iron Curtain country. But he could go to Canada, so I flew up to Canada and I met him for the first time at Expo in 1966. Physically, he looked like an Aparichnik. He had a dark suit on, a tie, tinted glasses, and he always had a very high voice. But in 67, he was able to come, not yet to bring his performances. His performances didn't come till 68, I don't think. He came, and I had arranged for him to do a workshop at NYU School of the Art. He came with Richard Schechner. Grotowski would describe and orate about the exercise, but Schechner would do them when we do them. There would be a thing called the cat. There would be stretches. There would be head rolls. There would be body rolls. They were adapted from Kathakali training, from yoga, from Grotowski's own imagination, and they were psychophysical. He would talk about, all this is in Towards a Poor Theater and Thomas Richard's work. They would talk about the secure partner, which is yourself or who you're partnering with, that the performance would be generated from within and come out and meet something else, that you had to complete a circle of a kind of creativity, that the performer was as much the creator of the performance as the playwright, that you could do textual montage, you could do acting montage, that he applied Stanislavskian type of truth in a certain way with this kind of body molding and more or less objective drama, which is a term he later used, that we find in certain Asian forms, where the form itself has a concreteness and an objectivity separate from anybody performing it. Closest we have in the West is like ballet. That ballet exists as a set of gestures, whether or not you're dancing them. And then you put them on like you put on a glove. You may make a change if you're a Nijinsky, or if you're a Balanchine, or you may compose a ballet, whatever. But it's different than theater, which is a much looser glove. So Grotowski wanted to combine that scored actuality of the ballet with that felt experience of Stanislavskianism. And he, in my view, has been the most successful of that of any artist I've known. They were intrigued to do this work. It was totally different from what they had done before because it was psychophysical. Some of them took to it better than others. I was so taken by it that Grotowski began, and within 2 weeks I announced I'm going to do a workshop. And I got the Tompkins Square Community Center on the east side of Tompkins Square, Lower East Side. And I said, anybody interested in working on this, I'll teach you what Grotowski's teaching me. Of course, Grotowski was pissed off. And that became the core of what the performance group was. I mean, the way I selected there, I said, anybody is welcome to come, and you're welcome to have one absence, but if you have a second absence, don't come back. And I'm going to form a group, I hope, out of those who are left. This is November 6, 1967. Today was the first day at the School of the Arts at Newark University with Jerzy Grotowski for section 12 of the acting program. We listened to approximately a half an hour of Mr. Grotowski introducing us to his method and approach, in which he told us that he could give us no positive technique or tricks to use or systems to use, but in place of formulas or whatever, he could give us only a negative training which would remove whatever personal blocks we might have to the expression of the creative acts. This, of course, as actors, He then outlined the elements of this negative system of training in 3 stages. The first step, or the first principle, consisting of the use of the person, the use of yourself, as he said, which means that whenever an actor has to do a part, he shouldn't construct out of the air gestures and vocal inflections, nor should he so much concentrate on where he is coming from as the character, what the character's objective is, what the character is wearing, what room the character is in, but should concentrate on what the actor, underlined personally, is displaying or revealing, in the service of the character, certainly, but the first consideration is with the personal stuff and the personal experiences and the personal life and energies and so forth of the actor. He gave as an example Shakespeare, etc., etc. So this is a very interesting journal because it's the first time that Grotowski was teaching and in the United States. And I should publish this because I have the rights to publish it, but I haven't published it because it would take some notation. And I'm in there because they describe when Grotowski was working with me, and that was, how bad I was. But so I was in this workshop and doing these plastiques, as they're now called, but association exercises. And after about 2 weeks of this, it was 4 days a week, I was so enthusiastic about what I'd learned. I had already experienced Grotowski, meeting him in Montreal the year before. I had read some of his things that later became parts of Towards a Poor Theater. And I knew I had come to New York. I wanted to do directing again. I announced that I would teach at night some of what I was learning during the day from Grotowski, and I would add it to some of the exercises that I had devised while I was living in New Orleans, because this is just 2 months into the time I was starting at NYU. And I don't remember how, but I got a room in the Tompkins Square Community Center, which is on the east side of Tompkins Square Park. And I began to teach in the evenings what Grotowski and Cheslak were teaching us during the day. And I remember the rule of my workshop. The rule of my workshop, which I use still all these years later, is anybody is free to come to this workshop. And if you miss one time, that's your free pass. If you miss the second time, do not come back. I will not let you in. I don't care if you're the best person here, if you were Sir Laurence Olivier, because what I need is commitment and presence rather than so-called talent. Whatever talent is, I don't really know how to measure it. I've been surprised so often by the people I thought were very talented who turned out to be duds, and by people who I thought, well, who knows, turned out to be spectacular. I don't know talent. But I do know if your body's in the room. That I can see. So if your body is in the room, if you are present, at least at that level, you can continue working. And you're given one absence. What are the rules? What if your mother dies? I'm very sorry, but you cannot come back in. There is no exception. So using that as the guide, within about a month or so, I was down to around 12 or 13 people from the 30 or 40 who showed up. Some were from NYU, some were just word out in the neighborhood, and these became the core people that started the performance group, because we continued to work in Tompkins Square, and in early January, NYU, they were in the professional actor training. They were told, and there were a couple of others as well, either you're in Schechner's workshop or you're at a school. You cannot get 2 trainings at once. And if you don't quit Schechner's workshop, you're not welcome to stay at School of the Arts. And those 3 decided to quit the School of the Arts and keep working with me. And others quit me and kept working, in at the School of the Arts. Somewhere in January of 1968 it was, because this began in December of 1967, November 1967, We were looking for a permanent space. And Bill Shepard comes and he says, I think I found a space down on Wooster Street. I had no idea where Wooster Street was. He took us. It was not called Soho at that point. It was just a place of basically small factories, a sweatshop, that kind of thing. When he took me, we walked into this cold room, cement floor, and 2 large garbage trucks. And I loved the space because it was what became the performing garage, about 30 feet long, 30 feet wide, 20 feet high, whole building, second floor. And I said, I'll rent it. It was the whole building. I don't think it was very much. I think it was like $250 a month or something, because it was an empty room over another, and the lower empty room, the garage, had no heating. The upper one had some heating. It was winter. It was cold, and I decided to call it later in the spring, and I don't know exactly when, the performing garage. Also, at that point, got together with a lawyer and incorporated a corporation. I wanted to call it the Performance Group Incorporated, because I already had that name. But that name was taken by something or other. So we had to incorporate another name, and I picked our street. So it became the Wooster Group Incorporated, doing business as the Performance Group. Later on, when I resigned from the Performance Group and Liz took it over, she continued that name, the Wooster Group. We began working in that space. It was still very cold, and we had a cement floor. I got gym mats, 3 long mats, I think 12 feet long and 3 feet wide. So when you lay them out, you had a rectangle of 12 by 9. And we did a lot of work on that. The other stuff we did on the cement floor, people would dress warmly. We brought in space heaters. We started to figure out how to bring heat into the place. And I wanted to begin working on, I was doing the exercises from Grotowski and Czeslak and my own exercises, but I knew I wanted to work on the Baki. And as we were working on the Baki, the group again, dwindled down a little bit. Somewhere along the way, Bill Finley joined the group, and we started to do Grotowskian type exercises, what they're now called plastiques, head rolls, body rolls, and other exercises of mine. They're all detailed in my book, Environmental Theater, which was published in 1972, and I wrote it in 70 and 71, right after this period, as I was developing exercises for workshops. We worked through the spring, and then it came time to mount this production. I was wanting to have an environment for this, and we were working in this big empty space. I had the model of Victims of Duty with the platforms and the carpets. It was cold in there, so I do remember going to a carpet remnant store and paying $200 or $300. And I said, how many carpets can you want? They said, as many as you can take away. So it's going to the garbage anyway, and we're getting a couple $100. So we brought a pickup truck or some kind of, took a huge amount of carpets over to the garage, put them on the floor, so we now could work on the floor, put the rectangle of carpet of rubber mats in the center, and then step by step the platforms were being built. In the meanwhile, there's a line in the Baki about the twin towers of Thebes. So I said, we need 2 towers, and we need some place that the spectators can sit on and that the performers can climb on. So Michael Kirby designed this. This is his model that he showed to me. Do you like this? And so here is the floor, and people can go up this ladder and this ladder. We can have performers up here, here. We can have spectators. And so we put 2 of them facing each other on an angle. The rectangle of 9 by 12 rubber mats, gym mats, were in the center. Underneath that was carpet. Everything was covered with carpet. These platforms are was all carpet. And thus the Dionysus in 69 environment was built. I call it environment. And why 69? Why not 68? Because I knew I wanted to open in 68. Well, there were 2 reasons, of course. One was I was hoping it would be a success. So you don't want to play Dionysus 68 when it's 1969. You want to be ahead. And then, of course, it's a sexy play, and 69 is a position I've always appreciated. I still have to fight with people who often make it Dionysus in apostrophe 69. And I say there's no apostrophe. We made buttons, I have them over there, with 69s on them that Dionysus throws at the end of the play. So we began to rehearse this particular play. And in wanting to rehearse and do the play, of course, I cast different roles from among the group, but I also was very affected at that time by the whole notion of participatory democracy. I got that from my years in New Orleans and working with the New Orleans group and working with the Free Southern Theater, and from the Port Huron statement of the Students for Democratic Action, which was effective to me. And I think in the Port Huron statement, they talk about participatory democracy. So the word participation meant something to me, not just audience participation, theatrical, but it meant something political. So I wanted to do a play that would involve what I got from happenings, what I got from the theory, that is participation, but that it also would involve a kind of democracy. And I thought of Dionysus as a social and sexual and political play all at once. It's about that. It's about the experience of somebody coming, of feeling liberated. That's, you participate in the dance, you participate in but it ends in a tragedy. It ends, you're betrayed by this God. So it's very ambivalent. He does bring liberty, but it's not anything like Woodstock. I never believed in Woodstock. I never believed in hair. I do not believe in liberation by means of drugs or any sex or anything else. I do not think we're a species capable of liberation. I think we're a species capable of a vast range of experiences, and that we're fundamentally tragic because we die. So Dionysus is a cautionary tale. It has been from the beginning to the end, in my view. How could I do participation? That is by rotating the roles. So everybody played all the roles. Each role was played by these different people. As time went on, we rotated the roles. So there were, for example, everybody played chorus, but 1, 2, 3, 4 people played Dionysus. Pentheus was played by 2 people, Tiresias by 2, Cadmus by 3, Agave by 4, and so on. So it rotated. We opened it on June 8th, 1968. Now, if you look up that date, that's the day that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The review comes out in the New York Times. Quote, anyone who's interested in where the modern theater is going will have to see it, unquote. After that, no advertising. We never had an empty seat. We only had room for 199 seats, places. We had no seats. And word of mouth was terrific. And the themes itself, we were touching the audience. Sometimes when we danced with the audience, they would get undressed, certain spectators. It was a wild night, but it was also a cautionary night. And then we performed it in University of Michigan, where we were arrested for indecent exposure. Every place we went, it was notorious or glorious or both. So it had this great positive repercussion. At the same time, I didn't want to get into the hair syndrome. I didn't want a Broadway hit. I didn't want something to go on for 20 years. So I closed it in July 69. We could have run it certainly for another year or two, but I wanted to work on something else. That's possibly was a bad decision because the other things we did were never as successful. We would rehearse in the evenings because people had jobs or they went to school or whatever. I was teaching. So we didn't rehearse during the day until after we had opened and we had more money and people could quit other things. And the way I had people divide up the chorus, you'd underline what you liked and what you didn't like. And you would have to, if it was neutral, you never said it. But if you underlined it as a like or a dislike, you had to say it. And that way the chorus sometimes had one voice, a few lines, which everybody was neutral about, were left out. Sometimes it had everybody because they either liked it or disliked it. And you have to say it in accord to your like or dislike. So if you had a line, I'm dancing for Dionysus, and you didn't like it, you're like, I'm dancing for Dionysus. If somebody else liked that line, I'm dancing for Dionysus. So you get the tone. There are different ways of playing games in rehearsals to get the right tone. And I took Grotowski seriously what I read from this thing, that we are always ourselves. You're never trying to be somebody else, but you're yourself in a certain situation, the real situation, playing opposite another person. I had this kind of authority, and as you can tell, I'm not overly shy, and I don't like to be subordinate. I like to be superordinate. So I would love to say that everybody should be equal, but that, as George Orwell said, all pigs are created equal, but some are more equal than others. It was a period of participatory democracy. At the same time, I felt I was the founder and leader of the group. I'm not an authoritarian person the way I think like Richard Foreman was in his rehearsals. He came in, he wanted everybody to have all the lines memorized before, and he said, you go here, you go here, you go here, it's exact. So mine is riskier in the sense I'm more likely to get disputes, because with Foreman, you're going to be a chess piece in his chess game. And if you're going to join his production, that's what you're going to be. You're going to be a pawn or a bishop or a king or a queen. That's it. You know it. In mine, you get the illusion that you are in charge. Observation plus subtraction. You see what you see and you take it away. And then what's left is the mise en scène, the least rejected of all the things tried. I think that's Grotowski or Peter Brook. But observation plus subtraction is me. I ask you, I evoke with you, I am very seductive in a rehearsal room or workshop to get you to show things. And then I say, oh, that's good. That's really good. Remember what you've done to your cheek there? No, do that again. Yeah, like that. No, longer, please. No. Don't try to not smile. Just do it again. You were doing this. Look, you were doing this. Don't mince at me. Just do it. Yeah, that's a little better. Now, you think you can do that tomorrow? So it was this negotiation back and forth, and it's collaboration and betrayal and cooperation. It all gets mixed in. When I worked at the Cornell Daily Sun, I like to be a writer. I've always liked journalism. I've always liked writing that is immediate. I didn't have any ambition to be editor of TDR, but once I got that apple, I wasn't going to give it up. I get a letter from Tulane in March, I believe, or maybe early April. It says, if you finish your dissertation and defend it, you can have Robert Corrigan's job and you can become editor of Tulane Drama Review. And I began at that point in 1962 to change TDR from a drama magazine, step by step, to a performance magazine. It was a drama review. It was about plays. It had Eric Bentley advising about European plays. It had John Gassner writing about plays. It had very famous people writing analysis of drama. There was very little about productions. I mean, it wasn't about how you staged it. And there was nothing about happenings or any. Bit by bit, I'm changing it, not all at once. I wanted that same board of editors. I was only 27 years old. I needed, I didn't make it into what it is now until after I began to think about, not moving here yet, but the happenings issue, which comes a little bit later. But it shows a pattern in my life. Never an academic administrative job. I wanted to use teaching, because I liked being in the classroom, as a way of exercising my theoretical and historical mind, as a way of having steady income, as a way of being committed to time only a couple of days a week and not in the summer. I think there were organizations and there were some groups, and so that we saw these groups in history and in Europe, and the idea was to have a stable group of artists who would produce a body of work rather than pick up it. I mean, it's really, the sports analogy is very, very powerful to me here. What will make a better team? What will make a better, and all-star teams are almost always worse than the champion of whatever league they come from. They don't have deep working relationships with each other. And therefore, again, to use the sports analogy, errors will be made, even though they're each excellent. But a team, which some people are stronger than others, they each have a place to play within it, they know how to react and interact. When we're making theater works, we're devising the score during rehearsal. It may be set by the time you bring it to the public, but it's not preset. The script, if you do start from a script, does not tell you exactly what to do. If you have a company, you're going to get a stronger rehearsal. After all, most plays, when you analyze them socially, are family affairs. You know, even if they're political plays like Hamlet to some degree. Well, of course, that's a family drama, a son, a father, an uncle, a mother. It's also about Denmark, but it's Denmark played out in that context. And the Brecht plays similarly. So, and families are ensembles. They sometimes don't function well. That's okay, but they know each other. Even if they hate each other and they don't really work together well, they know each other. And that makes a big difference. The living theater, which is a kind of the granddaddy of them all in that sense, of the post-war, post-World War II we're talking about. And I wrote the preface to one of Judith Malina's books about her work with Erwin Piscator. And Piscator taught in the 20s and 30s. Then with Hitler he came to the US and he taught, I think, at the New School, or what became the New School. And he was the originator of the idea of the epic theater. Brecht's epic theater is really Piscator's idea, which Brecht took and adapted and developed. And so the living theater came out of that. So they were, long before they were doing Paradise Now and those kind of wild deconstructions, they were doing more or less standard plays, but standard plays in a radical way. So something like The Connection, which was Jack Gilbert's play about a group of addicts hanging around waiting for the connection to come. And the Judson Dance Theater and the Grand Union are kind of synonymous. They welcomed new performances in the church, not as part of the church service, not as part of the liturgy, but to use the space of the church for that. There was so much activity in the streets. There were performances done in the street, but the street and its life was conceived of as a performance. There was guerrilla theater. That's why I said the San Francisco Mime Troupe, Ronnie Davis in San Francisco, who coined the term guerrilla theater, which was a kind of theater that functioned like a guerrilla war attack. You came, you did something, you disappeared. You weren't persistent. Let's say guerrilla theater is this theoretical and structural opposite of Broadway. Broadway wants to have as long a run, as highly visible as possible. Guerrilla theater wants to occur and disappear, strike and gone. Now the Ridiculous Theatrical Company and the Theater of the Ridiculous, they were two branches of the same thing. So it was Ronnie Tavel and Charles Ludlam, and they were partners at one point, and I don't know if they were lovers, but they worked together, and then they had a falling out, gay inflected for sure, and over-the-top camp stuff, very, very funny. And then there were things like the La Ballet de Trocadero, which I think is still around, which is gay guys doing serious ballet. Now people would laugh at them, and they would say, we're not meant to be laughed at, we're doing serious ballet. But at the same time, seeing like a 200-pound guy do Swan Lake is just, after having seen whatever Balanchines or whoever's, it looked like a parody, even if it wasn't meant to be a parody. Ontological hysteric theater. And what I liked, and also what mystified me about his work, was that I never really had any idea what it was about. It was always kind of like a cubism. In other words, cubism gives human figures, and they're kind of distorted, but they're very, very highly organized, not like abstract expressionism. Pollock is throwing paints on the canvas, and they kind of have a chance technique. It's beautiful, it's dripping and so on. But cubism is very, very precise, and yet it's not figurative. It was kind of like his mind turned inside out and put on stage, and he was manufacturing it as it went. And at one extreme we had some works that were highly improvised, like contact improvisation, that had rules in improvisation. The other extreme was Foreman, where everything was precisely set. I think Richard Foreman is about giving an objective structure to what he imagines in his mind. Creativity is one of those amorphous words, like love. We can use it, but it's very hard to define it. And I don't think theater is about creativity. I mean, I don't know what that, I really don't know what it means. I do know what it means to breathe, and I do know what it means to move in a certain way, and et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think Foreman's work is any more, quote, creative than Joe Chaikin's work. let's take a classic chain that we know. So Stanislavski, in the end of the 19th century, developed his system, his method, and he taught it to various people, including people who worked with him like Meyerholt, and some people from the United States, Lee Strasberg and Harold Klerman and a few others, went to meet with Stanislavski in Moscow and look at the work of the Moscow Art Theater. When they came back, they formed the group theater, and then the group theater morphed into the Actors Studio to some degree when it broke up as a producing unit, and Kazan went off to do movies, and Klerman did Broadway directing, and Strasberg continued to teach his version of Stanislavski, which is not the system, which is Stanislavski's word, but the method, which was Strasberg's word, and actor training, and that has had a profound impact on American performance culture, especially film. I'd say film even more than theater. So these are oral traditions, and they pass down the lines of generations. To some degree, what I learned from Grotowski and from some others, and then I directed and I passed that on to Liz Lecomte, who was an art student, basically had no theater training at all, but she came and worked as my assistant and then my assistant director, and now she's the head of the Wooster Group. That's another transmission of knowledge. Now what that kind of transmission is, it's in traditional cultures, the idea is to take what you get and make as few changes to it as possible. You study with a teacher and you take that teacher's technique into your body as much as possible, you perform it, and then you transmit it again. And although obviously it changes organically, the idea is to pass on what you receive. Receive, practice, pass on. Receive, practice, pass on. And these overlap. In receiving, you're receiving by means of practice. You're not receiving something, opening the package and doing it. You're receiving the dance by practicing it. And then you practice it. Of course, it's your body and not your teacher's body. So there are some changes, but it's as close as you can. And then as you mature, assuming you become a master in your own right, you get teachers and students, and you pass it on. But in the Western, in the Euro-American mode, in the American mode especially, where individuality and, quote, creativity, as you call it, is so important, it's almost built in that what you receive, you'll want to change. What you receive, you'll want to kind of disrupt, change, and make into something else again. And I'm part of that. I'm not aside from that. What I did at the Performing Garage is not Grotowski. It can be traced back to some degree to ideas I got from Grotowski. I wanted to put Richard Schechner's mark on it, or maybe I wasn't even conscious of that, but I was playing with my own mode, and so I devised the axioms for environmental theater even before I did the Performing Garage, and then I applied or used some of them, or I derived the theories from the practice, and then Lecomte's Wooster Group is nothing like the performance group, but it's also not unlike the performance group. And in the Western, or particularly the American situation, it is a body-to-body transmission, but the transmission involves change. However, transmission this kind of transmission depends upon a more or less stable community. And what happened at the end of the 70s and 80s is that these communities were coming apart. We were becoming much more individualized. Solo performance was coming in. The cult of the individual, the cult of identity, individual identity, group identity, was different than let's call it the cult of community. So we have the cult of community versus the cult of identity. And we're obviously still in a period of identity. You ask somebody who you are, you don't say, well, I'm a practicer of environmental theater. You say, well, I'm a queer this or that, or I'm a feminist or whatever. You have these identity markers. Now, the ethos business and the identity business came because of the reaction against the 60s and 70s. So when the government and the corporations all started to crush people, then identity became important, to assert your identity, to say, I don't want to be a member of the oppressed. I have my rights. I have my identity. I I am officially a Hindu. I have my conversion certificate over there. My name is Jaya Ganesh. I was initiated and trained in a temple in southern India. But I did not give up my Judaism. So it's like culture of choice. I'm both a Hindu and I'm a Jew. And that's why I have a lot of Ganeshas around, because Ganesh is the god of beginnings. I used to have a big Ganesh tummy. And I participate as a loving Jewish atheist. I love the prayers. I sing them. I go to synagogue. But again, it's a great creation of the Jewish people. So I look at these as cultural constructs and I participate in them. Ramnagar is a town across the Ganga River, which is the Ganges River, from Benares, which is a sacred city in India. And it's the seat of the Maharaja of Benares, which is a more or less upstart dynasty from the late 18th century, mid-18th century. They sponsor this 31-day spectacle drama telling the life of Rama, using the sacred text, the Ramcharitmanas, which is a 16th century text about the time of Shakespeare by a man named Tulsidas, which tells the life of Rama. When I saw this performance first in 1976, and then saw it in its 31-day entirety in 1978, it was the greatest performance I'd ever seen in my life, because it moved throughout an entire town. It had different places where it was staged. The performance moves day to day around the town. It takes up the entire town. It starts at 4:30 in the afternoon, goes to 6. There's a break for prayers. Some people do prayer, some people do partying and all of that, and then it resumes around 7:30, ends around 10. So if you're involved in it, of course, it takes an entire month. It absorbs you the entire month, because by the time you get home, if you're going across the river back to Benares, it'll be midnight, and then you get up, you wash, you get ready, and then you're ready to go again. And it was just a spectacular religious event, ritual event, performance event, and it depends on the participation of the Maharaja, who's no longer a real Maharaja. After 1947, all of the princely kingdoms were abolished, but they still call him Maharaja because he supports this performance and other ritual activities in Benares. And then the 5 boys who play the Swarups, which means the shape of the gods, Ram, his wife Sita, his brothers Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan, are all thought, while they're wearing their ritual crowns and their costumes, to actually be gods. So people come and touch them, and they bring them offerings, and they worship them, because they're thought to be like temple murtis. In Hinduism, these gods are actually alive. And they're all boys under the age of puberty, so that they have these higher voices. They are, quote, deemed to be innocent. They are treated for a month as if they're gods. They have to rehearse for 2 months before that. I did a deep study of it. So that was field work. All right, here it is. It's Robert Herrick. He's one of those poets of the 17th century. 1591 to 1674. All right, here is 1648 text. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best which is first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worst and worst times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may go marry, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. It's advice to virgins, and I've always liked that, Fuck it. The advice to virgins, you could put that down. Robert Herrick's advice to virgins could be simply, fuck it. The virgin of imagination, the virgins of thought, the virgins of action, whatever life has to offer, suck deep of the marrow of it. So by the time you get to be my age, you don't look back and say, oh my God, I wish I had, I wish I had, I wish I had. But you can look back and say, yeah, I did a lot of that, and I'm happy about it.
Artifacts is a free oral histories platform. Please like, subscribe, and visit our website, www.artifacts.movie, for an ad-free, interactive experience with bonus content. If you're able, please make a tax-deductible donation at www.artifacts.movie/donate. Hit the link on screen to watch another Artifacts interview.